Good day, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. And I'm guessing we got people from just about everywhere. So if you're with us here live, tell us where you're at. Say hello. Tell us where you're from. You can do that in the comments and whatever social platform you're in. I hope you'll do that. I'm so glad that you are here for a very special live today. So while you're here, I hope that you will imagine that you're joining us for a cup of coffee, and maybe you're having that cup of coffee with a mentor. So if you've got questions or comments or ideas, they'll help us have a better conversation. You'll get more value from it, and eventually we'll have a better podcast. And so if you didn't know, you can see up there in the corner that we're recording this live conversation, and eventually it will be placed into the sequence for the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. You can learn more about that at remarkablepodcast.com. And so given that, what I'm going to do now is do a countdown so we can actually, in post-production, actually start the podcast at that point. And I'm so glad that you're here. So let me do that, and then we'll get started. I'll bring in our guest in just a second. And so here we go, Marissa, in 3, 2, 1. Would you like a mentor whose journey you could learn from? And even if you have one or more mentors, how about another? This is the first in a very special series of podcast episodes that we're calling My Remarkable Journey. In each of these special episodes, we will talk with a senior leader, typically a CEO, to learn about their path, their lessons, and their journey towards becoming the leader they are today. So welcome to this very special episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. If you're listening to this podcast, you could be live for future episodes on your favorite social media channel. You can get information about that and access to those live episodes just by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. We're on other channels, but those will give you a place to start. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. And our episode today is brought to you by Remarkable Masterclasses. Each masterclass is designed to help you become the remarkable leader and human you were born to be. Details on how to get on board for a specific skill or to add these to your organization's online library can be found at remarkablemasterclass.com. And so now I'm going to bring in our guest. There he is. And let me introduce Marc to you. Our guest today for this very special introductory episode is Marc Reifenrath. He is the co-founder and CEO of Spinutech, which has grown from a university dorm startup over 20 years ago to a multinational digital agency with over 150 team members across the United States. In that capacity, he understands firsthand how critical a company's culture is to achieving and maintaining success. What's the secret ingredient to Spinutech's growth? Company values that are truly lived, including a commitment to get better every day. The company would not be what it is today without a team of people who are as invested in each other's growth and success as they are in delivering the best for their clients. I'm guessing that will show up a little bit more in a minute. Marc, welcome. Thanks for joining us for this experiment, this adventure.
I'm so honored. I didn't know I was going to be the first. This is great. I'm excited.
You are the first. I had this concept a number of months ago, and eventually, everybody, it might become its own separate podcast. But for now, we're gonna play with this format, and I have a different. If you are an ongoing listener to the podcast, a different set of questions for these episodes. And so, Marc, I want to start. You talked about university dorm room, or I did, I guess, in the bio. I'd like to have you tell us about your first leadership role. Like, how did that come about, and maybe what one of your big lessons from that was?
So I think my first leadership roles were probably with athletics, being on a sports team and having other people depend on you or look at you, whether you're a labeled leader or not, for what they should do, what you should do, what we should do in this situation. And oftentimes in sports, that's a little more high pressure because it's in the moment, it's in the line of fire. And so those were some of my first examples that I think happened. And then I would say the other ones were in college and all the random jobs that I had to scrape by. It wasn't necessarily that I was a leader, but what I found myself doing at a young age that is wise. I didn't realize it was wise at the time, but I probably was watching more what I didn't like about all the leaders that I had, because in a lot of those jobs, you were in high turnover situations, and a lot of those leaders weren't really good, because
That's
they're
shocking.
a lot.
And you know what? That hasn't changed in 20 years either, Marc. Just saying.
Right. But it taught me a bunch about what I know I didn't appreciate as being someone on their team. And so I tried to mentally file those away to say, and at the time I probably didn't realize, but if I were going to lead a team, these are things I wouldn't do, which when you start to eliminate a bunch of stuff, it really gets down to a pretty small list of what you think you should do. And so that was maybe my framework unknowingly before I came into a leadership role.
Yeah, so it's sort of like, okay, we can learn from every leader, right? What to do or what not to do. And to your point, oftentimes we have a lot of experience with, man, I don't want to do that. I don't even, why did they even think about doing it that way, right? So talk about something that you learned, I guess other than that observing others piece, like when you were, out of athletics and into the workplace, when you were in that first leadership role, what's one of the first things that you learned?
I think so. One of the things that I started to do was don't solve the problems for your team. If somebody came to me, so I worked in a cell phone store selling cell phones in the late 90s. So just a right time for cell phones coming to early adoption. But I would get calls throughout the day if I wasn't working, even from our team that sold. And they would say, "Hey, Marc, client or customers in here with this problem. What should I do?" And my natural response was, "What do you think you should do?" And so instead of just saying, "Well, do blah blah blah," and so as a leader, you develop this: what's the range of tolerance you have for an answer with that? And even if it's not what you would have done, that's okay, as long as it's within that range of tolerance. That's okay and still solves the problem. And then you can start to build that trust with that team member and potentially eliminate some of those dependencies that they feel that they have on you, and empower them to do the great things that they're capable of. I even had one team member at one point. We knew each other really well. She called, asked the question. I didn't even get the words out of my mouth. She goes, "Let me guess. What do you think I should do?" And I'm like, "Perfect, Erin, you've got it. All right, you don't even need to call me." I was like, "I trust you. Go do it." I go, "I don't even want to hear your answer. Just go do it." And so I think empowering is a really big one. And then on my side of it is you just have to be who you are. Don't put on a leader hat and change who you are for that role. You still got to be you.
I love that. And I love the underlying piece to that too, is that consistency, where she knew what you were going to ask because you've consistently done that. So,
Yeah.
Past athletics and past cell phones.
Yes.
By the way, if it was the early 90s, you were selling bag phones.
So I was just at the transition of bag phones, and the Nokia 5190 was the phone that I sold a lot of.
He remembers the number. So you've had a long journey since then. And so
Yes.
what's one thing that you're maybe especially proud of as a leader, over time?
I think for me, I don't know that core values and culture are a big part of who we are today. I don't know that my core values have changed from the beginning. They probably weren't labeled as they are today in our organization, but foundationally, they've always been the same. You know, we get better every day. I've had this mentality that I always myself want to get better each day. I attack the day, and that's something that our team does. And we've always had that undertone before it was written on a wall. We do the right thing. We've always done the right thing, even if it was the hard thing or it's not the easy thing to do. So our core values today are worded maybe differently than we would have worded them in 2000 when we started, but foundationally they're still the same. And I'm proud that we haven't shifted or altered who we are as we've grown, as society has changed, things like that.
I love that. And I was going to ask you to share a couple of those values, but you did that. And what I would say to you and to everyone else is that one of the things that make those so powerful is literally the way you frame them, and framing them in a very simple, clear, specific way. I love those. So what's something now, leaving the team and back to you, what's something that drives you, maybe drove you, but still drives you as a leader?
So I mean, my journey has evolved over 22 years. We started, like you said, in college. We were a few dudes in a college room then. Now we're a team of 165 spread out across the U.S. We started just doing design and development, which was simpler in those days, and now we do that plus digital marketing. But what drives me as a leader today, and this has evolved over time, but today it's really pouring into the other leaders on our team. In the beginning, it was you worked with everybody, and so it was just different. Today, though, it is all about having my cup overflow into the other leaders, and hopefully that trickles all the way down. I like to say up. I like to look at the org chart from the bottom up. I'm supporting everybody. I hope that flows from the bottom to the top and empowers, but also makes everybody else better. And I think I'm more effective, honestly, as a leader to a smaller group. I can really dig in on one-on-one conversations, and a lot of my questions today and these times is one of my first one is, Kevin, how are you doing? And if you start to answer anything about work, time out. Kevin, how are you doing? Oh, yeah. How are the wife and kids? What'd you do this weekend? How are you doing with detaching from work? How are you doing in this environment? And so it's just a different approach. I think today we just have to talk to our team way more, especially we're in a hybrid environment. We just have to talk to them more. And honestly, it's not as work related as it used to be. We got to bring in way more humanizing conversations because we're not bumping into each other in the office, in and out of meetings, car rides, airports, whatever, where you just really get to know what makes Kevin click. We don't have that today. And I tell the team all the time, like, I got to know how you're going to act when times get tough. When we're in battle together with a client, like when the client puts pressure on, they spend a lot of money with us. They're going to put pressure on us, as they should. I need to know what your pressure points are so I can help you out, and vice versa. So it's just a different leadership era, I think, of that we're all going through.
So I wasn't going to ask this, but since you said that you've sort of made or created whatever you want to call your return to office strategy, like what's something that you've learned about doing this all beyond what you just said, which I think is a really, really important place to start. Anything else that you'd share about what the organization has learned about doing your work in a hybrid manner?
So I think that engagement is easy for, let's say, 30% of your team. You're going to get those people because they would have been the ones in the office that were the champions anyways. So the shelf life of events to get deeper engagement with your team is really difficult. You've got to get super creative. You've got to, I don't want to say force it, but you've really got to encourage the engagement because it is so easy. And we have, oddly in marketing, we have a lot of introverts. We have people that can turn their light bulb on in a meeting room, and it's amazing. But they need that recovery time for their battery away from people. And so this environment kind of pushes them further into that hole. And so we need to help.
We need to bring them out.
Yes. And so, and it's just healthy for us as a team to interact as much as possible. So this year we've budgeted for every team to get together in person one time. So there's one of those happening in Des Moines, Iowa this week, actually, where the paid media team is coming together, and I guarantee they're going to have a blast. And there's going to be at least 10 people that say, "Man, this was great. We got to get together in person more often." And I always say yes, but it's just harder to do. So I think the shelf life would be the simple way of saying what have we had to evolve to is you got to keep the ideas fresh and new to keep people engaged, and you've got to get your leaders to reach out to get those people engaged.
And you started by asking the human question, how are you doing? Talking about what I like to say is talk about the non-work before we get to the work.
Yes.
Is super, super important. So I'm curious, Marc, and I know as humans, we're not as self-aware perhaps as we would like to think, and yet I'm still going to ask you a self-awareness question.
Sure.
And that is like, what would you say is your biggest strength as a leader?
I do think my EQ is pretty high, so I can read people and what perceive they're feeling pretty well. And so I'm typically the guy that I feel can, if there's 5 of us sitting together at dinner and that one person goes quiet, I can typically tie together the why of why they went quiet, what maybe was slightly offensive to them or
Mhm.
whatever. And I might on an aside pull them, and just say, hey, you okay? You good? And just trying to make sure that their need is being addressed.
I love that. So I'm gonna ask you the feedback question, which we typically think of as something that feedback often has the word negative attached to it. It's not necessarily intended here. So rather than asking the positive or negative feedback questions, what's the most valuable feedback that you've gotten as a leader?
Ooh, that I've gotten. I think it's probably been more validating of the things that I was doing that maybe they were picking up that I wasn't sure was the right thing. They were saying more of that. No, 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 do more of that. And you're like, okay, well, I wasn't sure if I should or not, but that's really helpful that you're telling me that you like that. I probably used to talk in meetings more. And as we've grown and our leadership team has um, grown, not in size, but just in their depth and their knowledge and expertise, I have become much quieter in those meetings and really observational. Because if I speak too soon, I'm influencing their answers. And I don't want them to gravitate towards what Marc thinks. I want to know I'm paying you for your opinion and for your ideas. And I want those unfiltered ones, good or bad, because I have plenty of bad ones too. And so I need, and some feedback I've gotten recently is I need to jump in maybe sooner than I have been to help guide and make some of those decisions. But I used to want to talk more. And so that as a leader, learning to be quiet and listen to the room, but then when you should come in and talk, just knowing that you carry a bigger hammer or whatever because of the seat, you got to make sure you understand the power of that.
This is a really interesting dynamic that you and I could probably have a really long conversation on camera or off, about like recognizing that we need to talk less. But one of the reasons we figured that out is we want to engage the group more. And then there is this time when we do need to get in. And sometimes if we've really figured out that we should be talking less and talking later, then sometimes that gets in our way when they're really looking to us or needing us to sort of
Right.
make
Right.
a decision, make a comment, redirect the group, whatever. Yeah,
Yes.
I've found exactly the same thing. I think it's a really, really good point. Um, so, uh, what would you say? And I think, I love this conversation, Marc, because I think everyone who's listening probably has some clues to this already. But how would you define your leadership philosophy?
So I'm a glass half full guy. I'm very positive. I think that all of us have more in us than we can perceive we do. So my philosophy is really give people a very long uh, rope or a lot of room to play. I think failure is a good thing. So fail, first attempt in learning. That's when we're going to learn the most. So I think we celebrate those. We don't look at them as a bad thing. I don't yell at people. It's not an iron fist by any means. It's a collaborative. Like again, we've put you in this position for a reason. So I shouldn't hold you back from that. And I really look at my philosophy as I just want to make Kevin be the best version of Kevin possible. And what do you need from me to accomplish that? I want to kick in those doors. I want to help push you to that. And when we hire people at Spinutech, I had the last interview, and I always tell them like I don't just want a yes. I want a hell yes. I want people all in on our team. And I tell them, I'm going to take you. You think you can go here? I'm going to push you to here. And I can't do that for everybody, but for our leaders, that's what I want them thinking too: is push everybody to get better every day. And it's just that constant growth, constant pushing. If you let the current of the water push you around and you're treading, you're not going to go in the right direction. So we've got to all be going towards how are we getting better personally, professionally. So there's a lot in there, but those are some of my philosophies that I like to live by.
I appreciate that very much, Marc. So, um, I I'd really like to know. I have never met a highly effective leader who wasn't a reader, at least
Mhm.
at some level, right? Some far more than others for sure. But I'd really love to know, and I'm sure others would too. Like, what's a book that's been meaningful to your career?
The Go Giver. So I had posted on LinkedIn about looking for some books about servant leadership. And someone in my life sent it to me, which I thought was beautiful. Someone that responded and said, "You need to read this." And they sent me the book, which I'm actually a listener. I listen to audiobooks primarily just with travel and stuff. But that was validating and inspirational in so many levels, just about I think I had been doing some of those things, but would have never been able to say that I was. And so to read it and hear it and say, don't expect anything in return. Just give, give, give. And when you give, somebody's going to give back to you. And you go into these situations without any expectations. And I probably in some situations did have an expectation. And so to just maybe change this thinking of being free of like, I'm just going to give to the world in every situation. And that's just a great attitude to have. And, we've had potential clients call and say, "Hey, can you build a new website for us? Can you take over our digital marketing?" And we've just not been the right fit for them. We've been too big or whatever. And instead of just saying, or not replying even, I've taken a call with them, spent a half an hour, and really just try to give free advice or point them in the direction of somebody that can help them. And you would be surprised how many of those people then sent ideal clients to us because they were like, "Oh, that guy helped me solve that problem. I want to help him." And so it is a good circle of life that you can get out of that. So that's definitely been a big one. A lot of Patrick Lencioni, you can't go wrong with any of that as well. That's too hard to say one book from him, but The Go Giver would definitely be my go-to book.
Bob Berg and David Thomas Mann, I believe, is his co-author on that. Read the book, love the book, know Bob. So that's awesome. So, um, we've sort of asked you, and I've been sort of trying to pull out some things so that all of us could learn from you and your journey. So, is there something that you wish I would have asked, or
Hmm.
anything else you'd like to say, Marc?
Wish you would have asked me. I mean, like you said, we can talk about a lot of these things for a very long time. That's a tough one. I think if you were going to ask me something, why am I so passionate about our people, and why do I think culture and core values matter so much? That would be the thing that I would say. And so, do you want me to answer my question then?
Sure,
Um,
absolutely.
so I think that without a good, solid foundation of what your core values are and your culture are, you're just asking for problems. And for us, doing digital marketing, lots of lead gen for our clients, and having a high performing team, if we didn't have that stuff, I can only imagine the problems we would have. And so here's the thing I love to tell people is our core values are so solid. This is how we hire, fire, lead, manage, and solve problems. Say it again. Hire, fire, lead, manage, solve problems using our core values. And if that's a piece of advice that I could give everybody is dig in on your core values, believe in them, make them lived, um, and then that's how you solve all your problems. And life can get a little bit easier when you're doing that.
So the organization we're talking about is the one that you're the CEO of and co-founder of, Spinutech. So tell us about Spinutech and anything else that you want to point us to before we wrap up.
Sure. Thank you. So yeah, Spinutech, we're about 165 people across the U.S., five physical offices, which, like we said, don't really matter as much anymore. But we've got a very passionate team that does care a lot about our core values and our culture, and they're really, really good at lead generation. So we build great websites, we do great campaigns after that ultimately lead to converting into leads, and a lot of them convert into sales. And so the team is really passionate. That's our sport. That's our game that we play, and we've got a great team that they're. I mean, I know every company says they have the greatest, the best people. That's our filter. Is we just hire really great A players or the potential to have it, and they're really good at what they do, and that's super fun to have the honor of leading that team doing that.
Marc, thank you for being here. Before we go, though, everyone, I've got a question for all of you who are listening. It's the most important question I will ask today, and Marc gets to sit back because he doesn't have to answer. He can for himself, but I'm asking you now, what are you going to do with this? You have about 20 minutes of insight from a guy who's built a company and who's been very thoughtful as a leader and obviously had great success in doing that. So the question that I would have for you is, what are you going to do with this information? What insight did you get? Maybe it was the very last thing he said. Maybe it's the book that you want to go read. Maybe it's something he said early about how you can engage with your team more or be more human with your team, or maybe it's about talking less. I don't know what it is for you, but the most important thing that you can take from this is some action based on what you got. And so, Marc, thank you for being here. Thank you for playing in this adventure. You didn't even know you were the first one on this adventure. So like 350 episodes in, and now we're trying something new. And I'm so happy that you were the first, and it was a pleasure to have you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It was a blast. I had a lot of fun.
All right. So everybody, I'm going to let you go. We're going to be back. And this was an extra bonus episode. So in a couple days, there'll be the regular type of interviews conversations that you're used to seeing. And later this week, another short conversation with me. And so I hope that you'll take advantage of all that, joining us continually for the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.